Hello, I'm Jane Brady, and I'm pleased to be with you today, even if only by videotape. I'd like to explain to you why I'm running for the U.S. Senate this year. This election is all about who will control Delaware's future, the special interests or the people. Because after all is said and done, the election is in your hands. It's not the special interest groups and their money who will decide the election for the U.S. Senate, but you. I'm convinced that we must control congressional spending by adopting true reforms, such as a balanced budget, tax limitation, constitutional amendment, and a presidential line-item veto. We must reform Congress to limit senators to only 2 terms, to cut congressional staff and junk mail spending, to end pay for senator speeches, and reverse the last congressional pay raise. I served this state as a prosecutor for over 12 years, and I know firsthand the crime and drug problem in Delaware. My opponent's recent proposals would have nullified the death penalty, continued multiple appeals for criminals, and allowed guilty people to go free by throwing out evidence that even the Supreme Court has ruled admissible. Fortunately, none of these proposals became law. When I began this campaign, I thought my opponent's voting record, more liberal than Ted Kennedy's, did not represent Delaware, and I found that I was right. But meeting the voters of Delaware these past few months has taught me something I did not know. You have told me that the #1 issue to you is the character of the public officials you elect. You have told me that the system in Washington captures individuals who go there, and they lose touch with the concerns of people like you and me. My opponent has now become part of the problem in Washington. I was shocked when I saw the next segments of this video to see just how out of touch he is. And frankly, my first reaction was not to include it. But you have told me that character is important, and you must be the judge. We have high standards in Delaware, and you must decide who best meets those standards this year.
The following material is a replay of news broadcasts, only editing out duplications.
Democratic presidential candidate Joseph Biden today faces a controversy that his opponents could use in raising questions about his character. 3 weeks ago, at a debate at the Iowa State Fair, he used phrases identical to those delivered by British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock. Biden did not attribute the words to Kinnock. Instead, he said they were his own thoughts. Was it plagiarism? Ken Bodie reports.
Joe Biden is known as one of the best orators in the Democratic Party, so it was no surprise that at a forum in Iowa recently, he knocked their socks off with a stirring close. Listen.
And I started thinking as I was coming over here, why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university? Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
People in Britain would have been familiar with those words. They heard the same ones in a political commercial from Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock.
Why am I the first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university? Why is Glenys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations?
Biden saw the Kinnock commercial and evidently loved it.
Was it because they were weak? Those people who could work 8 hours underground and then come up and play football? Weak?
My ancestors who worked in the coal mines in northeast Pennsylvania don't come up after 12 hours and play football for 4 hours?
Biden had told other audiences he admired Kinnock, not this one. This one, he later said, he had listening in hushed silence.
No, it's not because they weren't as smart. It's not because they didn't work as hard. It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
Does anybody really think that they didn't get what we had because they didn't have the talent or the strength or the endurance or the commitment? Of course not. It was because there was no platform upon which they could stand.
Politicians don't always write their own material. John F. Kennedy didn't write, "Ask not what you can do for your country." The problem here is that Senator Biden told his audience he'd just been thinking about these things, and he failed to give any credit at all to his famous British speechwriter. Ken Bodie, NBC News, Washington.
Aides to Senator Biden said tonight that the issue is not worth the senators commenting on it personally.
Senator Joseph Biden, hounded by charges that he has routinely stolen the words of other politicians, admitted today that he once engaged in plagiarism while at law school. But he insisted that he's a victim of dirty politics, and he vowed to stay in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. NBC's Ken Bodie has more tonight.
While at Syracuse Law School, Biden was involved in a plagiarism incident. He quoted 5 pages of someone else's work without proper citation. He was given an F, but appealed to the faculty and allowed to repeat the course. He got a B. This comes in the middle of another controversy about plagiarism in Biden's campaign speeches. Today, he dismissed charges that he routinely adopts phrases from other politicians' speeches, called it much ado about nothing. Essentially, Biden said, everyone does it.
The notion that every thought or notion or idea you'd have to go back and find and attribute to someone, I think is, quite frankly, ludicrous.
But to the political community in Washington, it all seems of a piece. Plagiarism at law school, plagiarism on the stump, for example.
But this standard is not a measure of how we can evaluate the condition of our society. It cannot measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the joy of their play.
This is how it sounded when Robert Kennedy said those words in 1968.
Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play.
Biden gave Kennedy no credit. He has also quoted or paraphrased John Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock, all without credit.
That our generation of Americans will pay any price, bear any burden, accept any challenge, and meet any hardship.
President John Kennedy's inaugural, 1961. Biden's critics say he sells himself as a man whose words and visions can inspire a new generation in politics. But if the thoughts, phrases, and visions really belong to others, it's a form of false advertising. Robert Kennedy's friend and speechwriter.
If what he did was to present Robert Kennedy's thoughts and statements and speeches as his own, then of course it's counterfeit.
An extraordinary news conference today by a presidential candidate under fire. Joe Biden admitted to plagiarism back in law school. He did so amid accusations that some of his most effective speeches now include quotations from others without credit. Our national affairs correspondent Leslie Stahl is here to report on Joe Biden's explanation in his own words. Leslie?
Dan, as you said, Joseph Biden admitted today that he committed plagiarism when he was in law school. He said it was a mistake, but that it was unintentional.
Biden released his record from Syracuse University Law School, where he graduated near the bottom of his class. An official report stated that he had copied 5 pages from a law review article without attribution.
Mr. Biden used 5 pages of published law review articles, of a published law review article, without quotation or citation. That's precisely right.
Once again, the question of character dominates presidential politics. First, it was Gary Hart who pulled out of the race because of his relationship with Donna Rice. Today, it was Democratic Senator Joseph Biden. In his case, the transgression was using other people's words and ideas while embellishing his own record. Here's John Dancy.
Joe Biden found himself living the presidential candidate's worst nightmare. Television crews lying in wait for him everywhere, at the train station where he wasn't, and at home where he was. The camera's presence part of this year's now familiar drama, The Candidate in Trouble. This afternoon, the familiar end to the drama, as Biden pulled out of the presidential race.
I made some mistakes, but now the exaggerated shadow of those mistakes has begun to obscure the essence of my candidacy and the essence of Joe Biden.
Biden's troubles began just 2 weeks ago in Iowa, with reports he had plagiarized a speech by England's fiery Labour Party leader, Neil Kinnock. There was more. A videotape caught Biden at a neighborhood coffee in New Hampshire, making exaggerated claims about his college record.
Went back to law school and, in fact, ended up in the top half of my class.
In fact, as Biden finally conceded, he finished near the bottom of his class.
Only one prominent Democrat suggested today that Biden had made the wrong decision, that he should have stayed in the race and insisted his entire public record be considered. That was Gary Hart. Ken Bodie, NBC News, Davenport, Iowa.
This is Joe Biden's week in the sun. And Joe Biden walked out on center stage, and there was a huge spot on his tie. The problem he has is that people were going to be paying attention to him this week, and what they found out was something that wasn't especially attractive about him.
I've never plagiarized in law school.
So, there it is. The decision is yours. You know my views, and you know my opponent as the nation sees him. It's up to you, and I hope I have your support. But you have to vote to make your opinion count. Please, be sure to vote on Tuesday, November 6th. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Some politicians talk tough about crime. Jane Brady is tough on crime. I need Jane Brady in the United States Senate to work with me to put violent criminals away for good.